After an argument while camping, my son left me in the middle of the cold taiga. He thought I would never return, but as soon as he arrived home, I was waiting for him, and I wasn't alone. "Son, meet my friends," I said. His face turned pale. "Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel. And write in the comments what time it is, where you are now." The truck's steering wheel felt solid under my palms as we climbed higher into the Cascade Mountains. Early August sun breaking through the pine canopy in slanted beams. I'd been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. 3 days with my son Brian and his wife Stephanie. A chance to reconnect after months of brief phone calls and cancelled dinners. But 20 miles outside Portland, something shifted in the air between us. I caught them in the rearview mirror, Brian and Stephanie in the back seat. Her hand touched his knee, a quick squeeze. His eyes met hers, then flicked away. No words, just that silent exchange people make when they're sharing secrets. The kind of look my late wife Marie and I used to share across crowded rooms. But this wasn't love I was seeing. This was conspiracy. "Beautiful up here, isn't it?" I said, trying to shake the unease settling into my chest. Stephanie responded, not looking up from her phone. We reached the Mount Hood National Forest campsite just after noon. I'd reserved a spot near the creek, far enough from other campers to feel like wilderness, close enough to the facilities that Stephanie wouldn't complain. The irony of that consideration would hit me hard later. Setting up camp took an hour. I drove tent stakes into the hard earth, while Brian struggled with the rainfly, his fingers clumsy with the clips. 40 years of working with my hands, building houses, crafting furniture, teaching young people the difference between a miter joint and a mortise, had given me a kind of fluency with physical tasks. My son had inherited my height and broad shoulders, but not my patience with tools. "Need help with that?" I offered. "I've got it, Dad." His tone carried an edge I couldn't place. Stephanie emerged from their tent wearing hiking boots that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. She stretched elaborately, making a show of her exhaustion from the 2-hour drive. "This altitude is already getting to me. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, Roland." The comment landed like a stone in still water. I was 68. Not ancient. Sure, my knees complained on cold mornings, and I'd developed a habit of gripping the handrail going downstairs, but I'd built my house from the foundation up. I'd carried sheets of drywall on my back, framed walls, installed roofing in summer heat that would have sent younger men to the emergency room. "I managed just fine," I said. We ate lunch at the camping table I'd hauled from my garage, another piece of my handiwork, pine planks sanded smooth and sealed against weather. Brian pulled out sandwiches Stephanie had prepared, turkey and avocado on artisan bread. The afternoon heat pressed down on us, thick with the scent of warm pine needles. Then Brian reached into his backpack and withdrew a manila folder. "Dad, we need to talk about something." He slid the folder across the table. "Paperwork we need to handle." I opened it slowly, feeling Stephanie's eyes tracking my every movement. Legal documents, dense with terminology I'd have to read carefully to fully understand, but certain words jumped out immediately. Transfer of property, deed, signature required. My address in Portland, the house I'd built with my own hands over the course of 2 years, every board selected, every nail driven with intention. "What is this?" I asked, though understanding was already dawning cold and unwelcome. "We think it's time you consider downsizing," Brian said. His rehearsed tone suggested he'd practiced this speech. "The house is too much for you now. 4 bedrooms, all those stairs, the maintenance. We're worried about you." "Worried," I repeated the word, testing its weight. Stephanie leaned forward, her expression shifting to something she probably thought looked like concern. "Honestly, Roland, what does a man your age need with 4 bedrooms? You're just rattling around in there like some ghost. It's selfish, really." The word hit harder than she'd likely intended. Selfish. My home, the place where Marie and I had raised Brian, where we'd hosted neighborhood barbecues and Sunday dinners, where I'd taught apprentices the craft of woodworking in my basement workshop, was selfish because I still lived in it. The property's worth $580,000 now, Brian added. "Maybe more. We could sell it, get you into a nice 1-bedroom apartment, something manageable. You'd have money left over, no maintenance headaches." "And you'd have what?" I asked quietly. He had the decency to look away. "We'd help manage the sale, handle the details. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." I closed the folder, my hands calloused, scarred from decades of workshop accidents. The right index finger, slightly crooked from a break that hadn't set quite right, rested flat on the manila surface. These hands had shaped every doorframe in that house. They'd carved the banister Brian had slid down as a child. They'd built the kitchen cabinets where Marie had stored her grandmother's china. "I built that house board by board," I said. "Every door frame, every cabinet, my hands shaped them. You don't just hand that over because someone decides you're inconvenient." Stephanie's face hardened. "We're trying to help you face reality. You can barely climb the stairs anymore. I climb them every day." My voice stayed level, but heat was rising in my chest. "I'm not signing anything, Dad. Be reasonable." Brian stood, and I registered his size advantage. 6'2" to my 5'11", probably 50 pounds heavier. He began pacing around the campsite perimeter. "We're trying to help you. Just sign the papers, and we'll handle everything." I stood too, turned toward the firewood I'd stacked earlier, and began splitting kindling with methodical strikes of the camp hatchet. Each blow gave me something to focus on besides the rage building behind my sternum. The wood split clean under the blade, satisfying in its simplicity. Behind me, I heard Stephanie's water bottle hit the ground, thrown, not dropped. "This is ridiculous. We drove all the way up here for this stubbornness." They spent the rest of the afternoon in tense silence. I prepared dinner, foil packets with salmon, potatoes, and vegetables that I'd prepped at home, while they sat at the table, muttering to each other in voices just low enough that I couldn't make out words. We ate without conversation, the creek's burble filling the spaces where family warmth should have been. Darkness came early under the forest canopy. I retreated to my tent while they stayed by the fire, feeding it larger logs that sent sparks spiraling up toward the stars. Lying on my sleeping pad, I tried to convince myself this was a misunderstanding, that tomorrow we'd talk reasonably, and I'd make them understand why that house meant more than its market value. Then I heard Stephanie's voice, sharp and clear through the thin nylon walls. "How long do you think we have to wait? He's 68. Could be years." My breath stopped in my chest. Brian's response came quieter, but the night air carried it perfectly. "Unless something happens up here, accidents happen in the mountains all the time." The world tilted. I lay completely still, every muscle frozen, as their conversation continued. "He's being impossible about this," Stephanie continued. 580,000 just sitting there while he plays carpenter in his basement. "We have plans, Brian. The market won't wait forever." "I know." His voice held something I'd never heard before, a coldness that made him unrecognizable as the boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd called me every Sunday from college just to talk. "But I can't just—" "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting nature takes its course. He's old. He's in the mountains. Things happen." The silence that followed felt endless. I waited for Brian to protest, to defend me, to be my son instead of whatever he was becoming. The silence stretched until I realized it was his answer. "Sleep well, Dad?" Brian asked the next morning, pouring coffee with an overly cheerful smile. "You look tired. Maybe this hiking is too much for you." The next morning arrived cold and grey, matching the ice that had formed overnight in my chest. I packed my day pack with mechanical precision, water bottles, trail mix, first aid kit, my phone, while Brian and Stephanie discussed the beautiful hiking day ahead in voices that sounded like actors delivering lines. I said nothing about what I'd heard. Some instinct older than thought told me silence was survival. "Ready for the trail?" Brian asked, shouldering his pack. "It's supposed to be challenging, but the views are worth it." "I'm ready," I said, the words flat in my mouth. We started hiking single file, Brian leading, Stephanie in the middle, me trailing behind. The path began wide and well-marked, popular enough that we passed other hikers heading down from early morning starts. Brian nodded at them, playing the dutiful son on a family outing. The performance would have been convincing if I hadn't heard him contemplating my death 12 hours earlier. After the first mile, the trail narrowed. The crowds thinned, then disappeared. We moved deeper into wilderness, the main path giving way to a more difficult route that Brian claimed would lead to a spectacular viewpoint. I let the distance between us grow, keeping them in sight but staying back, some animal part of my brain calculating angles and exits. The terrain grew rockier, ancient stones thrust up through thin soil, and the path became barely more than a suggestion scratched into the mountainside. Below us, the slope dropped away steep enough that a fall would mean serious injury at minimum. Above us, granite cliff faces rose into mist that the morning sun hadn't burned away. We stopped at a flat outcrop where where the trail widened slightly. Brian drank from his water bottle, then turned to face me. The genial mask had slipped. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard. "We need to settle this, Dad. Right now." "Settle what?" I kept my voice neutral, my body loose, the way I'd learned in my 20s when confrontation was more common than I liked to remember. "The house, the papers, your stubbornness." He stepped closer. "I'm done asking. Sign the papers today, or I swear I'll make sure you regret it. You think you're so tough? You're just a tired old man who can't accept reality." Stephanie watched from her perch on a boulder, arms crossed, a slight smile playing at her lips. This was her show, I realized. Brian was just the muscle. Something shifted inside me, a door closing, a circuit breaking. The years of trying to be the father he needed, the inheritance I'd imagined passing down, the hope that family meant something permanent and true, all of it fell away like dead wood, finally splitting along the grain. "I've made my decision, Brian." My voice came out steady, almost gentle. "When we get back, I'm calling my lawyer. The house, the savings, everything. It's going to the woodworking apprenticeship program downtown. You get nothing." His face went red, then white. "You're what?" "I'm leaving it to kids who actually want to learn something, who appreciate craft and effort. Young people who remind me why I started building in the first place." Each word felt like driving nails. "You and Stephanie can make your own way." "He just cut you out completely," Stephanie said, rising from her boulder. Her voice carried that same calculating coldness from last night. "He chose some random kids over his own son." Brian's hands clenched. I watched him struggle with something. Conscience, maybe, or the last shred of whatever love he'd once felt. Then something in his expression hardened, and I knew which way he'd fallen. "You selfish old bastard." He moved fast, faster than I expected. His hands hit my chest, hard, two-palmed shove that sent me stumbling backward. My boots scrambled for purchase on loose stone. My arms windmilled, reaching for balance that had already fled. The world tilted, sky and rock trading places. Then my head met stone with a sound like wood splitting, and the world went white, then red, then grey. I came to awareness slowly, pain radiating from the back of my skull in waves. Time had passed. How much I couldn't tell. The sun had moved, shadows falling differently across the rocks around me. I lay on my back on cold stone, staring up at pine branches that swayed in wind I couldn't feel. Voices, close by. "Leave him, Brian." Stephanie's words cut through the fog in my head. "Look around. We're miles from anywhere. An elderly man. Difficult terrain, a fall. It's tragic, but these things happen. No one will question it." "He's my father, Steph." Brian's voice held uncertainty, but not enough, not nearly enough. He just cut you out completely. He chose some random kids over his own son. You don't owe him anything." Her footsteps moved closer. "Besides, we've already crossed the line. You pushed him. He hit his head. We either commit now, or we both go down for assault." The logic was clean, ruthless. I lay still, willing my breathing to stay shallow, my body to remain limp. "Take his pack," Stephanie said. "His phone especially. We can't risk him calling for help." Through slitted eyes, I watched Brian crouch beside me. His face swam in and out of focus. My son, my betrayer. His hands found my daypack straps, tugged them off my shoulders. The weight lifted away. I heard zippers, the rustling of nylon, the small sounds of my supplies being removed. Water bottles, trail mix, first aid kit, my phone. "What about his medication?" Brian asked. "Especially that. Heart condition, right? Let nature do the work." My heart medication. The pills I took every morning for the arrhythmia that had developed 5 years back. Not immediately fatal to skip them, but after a head injury, with my heart rate elevated, with stress and cold, they were leaving me to die, actually consciously, deliberately leaving me here. Footsteps retreating, the crunch of boots on gravel growing fainter. I waited until the sounds faded completely before opening my eyes fully. The sky was deepening toward evening, grey clouds moving in from the west. I'd been unconscious for hours then. The temperature was already dropping, that mountain cold that comes fast once the sun starts setting. I lay there another few minutes, taking inventory. My head throbbed, and when I touched the back of my skull, My fingers came away sticky with blood, not arterial bleeding. I was alive enough to know the difference, but enough to matter. My body shivered, hard tremors I couldn't control, shock or cold or both. The empty pack lay beside me, discarded after they'd stripped it of anything useful. I had the clothes on my back, my boots, and nothing else. No phone, no water, no way to signal for help. 4 miles to the main trail, I calculated. Maybe more, given how remote this section had felt. 8 miles back to the parking lot from there. In these conditions, injured, that could be a 12-hour hike, maybe more. But I'd survived worse. 68 wasn't dead, wasn't helpless. I'd grown up in a rougher Portland than the one that existed now, had learned to navigate situations where the wrong move meant consequences. Marie used to joke that I'd been built from tougher materials than modern men, said I had old-school resilience that came from a generation that didn't expect the world to be soft. My own son tried to kill me. My own blood left me here to die. The thought crystallized into something hard and sharp in my chest, cutting through the pain and shock. They'd made a mistake, leaving me alive. A stupid, crucial mistake born from their weakness. Their assumption that I was already as good as gone. I rolled onto my side, then my hands and knees. The world spun, steadied. I breathed carefully, feeling my ribs for cracks, testing my limbs for breaks. Everything worked, everything hurt, but everything worked. Slowly, gripping a tree trunk for support, I pulled myself upright. The trail stretched out before me, growing darker as clouds obscured the remaining daylight. Behind me lay the way Brian and Stephanie had gone, back towards safety and warmth, and whatever story they were already constructing about their tragic loss. Ahead lay survival, and then something else, something they wouldn't expect, couldn't prepare for. They thought I was weak, disposable, an obstacle to be removed. They'd forgotten who built them their childhood home. They'd forgotten the strength required to shape wood and stone into shelter. The cold bit deeper as I took my first step, but inside me something colder was forming. Patient, calculating. My son had left me to die in these mountains, but death would have to wait. I had work to do. The cold wasn't the enemy. Giving up was. As the last light faded behind the western peaks, my hands began to move. Not because I'd made a conscious decision, but because 40 years ago my father taught me how to survive in these mountains, and tonight his lessons would save my life. I rolled onto my stomach, pushed up to my knees, then stood, swaying but upright. The world tilted and righted itself. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, and the dried blood in my hair pulled at the wound when I touched it gingerly. But I was vertical. That counted for something. First priority, shelter. Temperature was already dropping. That sharp mountain cold that seeps through clothes and into bone. I'd die from exposure before dehydration killed me. I moved slowly, scanning the area near the outcrop where I'd fallen. Fallen. The word felt wrong. I'd been pushed. My son had put his hands on my chest and shoved me backward onto stone, then walked away while I bled. Focus, save the rage for later. 30 yards downslope, I found what I needed, a fallen cedar, its trunk creating a natural windbreak against the northeast breeze. Deadfall branches lay scattered around it, and pine trees overhead would provide additional cover. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I gathered materials. Strip the bark from dead cedar. The inner layers could provide insulation. Lean longer branches against the log to create a frame. Weave smaller branches between them. Pack the gaps with pine boughs and needles. Each movement came from somewhere deep in memory, my father's patient voice guiding 15-year-old me through these same motions during camping trips I'd half forgotten. Always be able to take care of yourself, Roland, he'd said. Don't matter how modern the world gets. You need to know how to survive with nothing but what nature provides. The shelter took shape slowly, nothing fancy, just enough to trap body heat and block wind. My hands shook from cold and the aftermath of adrenaline, but they kept working. Next, fire. Without it, the shelter wouldn't matter. I searched the area methodically, looking for specific materials. Soft wood for the fireboard. I found a dead cottonwood branch, punky and dry. A harder wood for the drill. Oak, still solid despite years on the ground. A flexible green branch for the bow. My bootlace, sacrificed from my left boot, would serve as the bowstring. The bow drill method was something I hadn't attempted since my 20s, but muscle memory guided my hands. Carve a notch in the fireboard. Create a socket in a piece of bark to hold the drill top. Wrap the string once around the drill shaft. Position everything carefully, then begin. Back and forth. Steady pressure, the drill spinning against the fireboard. My arms burned, sweat formed despite the cold. The throbbing in my head built to a crescendo, but I didn't stop. Smoke began to rise from the friction point, thin at first, then thicker. An ember formed, glowing red in the gathering darkness. I transferred it carefully to a bird's nest of shredded cedar bark and dry grass, cupping my hands around it, breathing gently. The ember brightened, smoke thickened, then flame, small and precious and growing. I fed it carefully, gradually adding larger twigs, then branches. Within 20 minutes, I had a real fire, and the warmth on my face felt like vindication. I can still survive alone. They left me with nothing, and I created shelter and fire from wilderness. I'm not the helpless old man they think I am. The night passed in stages. I kept the fire going, feeding it steadily, maintaining the flames that kept hypothermia at bay. Sleep came in brief snatches, interrupted by pain and cold and the recurring image of Brian's hands shoving me backward. Dawn arrived grey and cold. I let the fire die to coals, then scattered them carefully. No trace of my presence here. Some instinct told me to leave no evidence they could use to track my survival. Navigation came next. I studied the rising sun's position, recalled the topographic layout from the drive up. Southeast bearing would take me toward the main timberline trail. From there, I could find help. I walked steadily, despite the throbbing in my skull and the hollow ache in my stomach. The terrain was rough, but I'd spent a lifetime on construction sites, climbing scaffolding, carrying heavy loads. My body knew how to push through discomfort. 3 hours later, I reached the main trail. The path was wider here, well maintained, showing recent boot prints, civilization, or at least the edges of it. I sat on a fallen log to rest, and that's when I heard footsteps approaching from uphill. A young man in his late 20s, alone, moving at an easy pace with a large pack on his shoulders. He saw me and stopped. His eyes widened slightly, taking in my appearance. The blood-matted hair, the dirt-covered clothes, the exhaustion in my posture. "Sir, you're bleeding. Should I call 911? You need a hospital." I stood slowly, keeping my voice calm and firm. "No ambulance. Just need to borrow your phone for one call. Private matter." Something in my tone stopped his questions. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it over without argument. I turned away slightly, dialed the number I'd had memorized for 15 years. Lester answered on the second ring. "Lester, Mount Hood, come alone." A pause, long enough that I knew he was processing the serious tone, the minimal information, the unspoken urgency. "Give me the nearest landmark." "Timberline Trail Junction, East Side, 2 hours. I'm already walking to my truck." I handed the phone back to the young hiker with a nod of thanks. "Appreciate your help." He wanted to ask more. I could see the questions forming, but something in my eyes stopped him. He wished me well and continued down the trail, leaving me to wait. Lester arrived in exactly 2 hours, his old Ford pickup rolling to a stop at the trailhead parking area where I'd walked to meet him. He looked at me through the windshield, his weathered face registering shock quickly masked by concern. He climbed out, opened the passenger door without a word, and waited while I pulled myself up into the seat. We drove in silence for the first hour, Highway 26 winding down from the mountains toward Portland. Lester kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, respecting whatever boundary I'd set by asking him to come alone. Finally he spoke. "You want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "You hurt bad?" "I'll live. That's what matters." He nodded, asked nothing more. That was Lester, 72 years old. My neighbor for 20 years, a man who understood that some silences carried more weight than words. I spent the drive thinking, planning. The pieces were falling into place in my mind, a strategy forming from the cold rage that had taken up residence where shock used to be. Brian and Stephanie thought I was dead. That gave me time, opportunity, the element of complete surprise. But I needed more than surprise. I needed legal backing, evidence, allies who could help me strike with more force than they could defend against. Using Lester's phone, I made 2 more calls during the drive. The first to Oregon Adult Protective Services, reporting abandonment and suspected financial exploitation. The second to Portland Police Bureau non-emergency line, providing my name, location, and a brief statement about being left to die in the mountains by family members. Both operators took me seriously. Both promised to send representatives to my home address within hours. I gave them an estimated arrival time of early evening, asked them to coordinate their timing. As we entered Portland's outskirts, familiar streets replacing mountain wilderness, I felt my body beginning to fail. Adrenaline had carried me this far, but exhaustion and injury were catching up. I had maybe 2 hours of functional capacity left before I'd need to collapse. 2 hours would be enough. "Drop me at the corner of Fremont and 33rd, I told Lester as we approached my neighborhood. "I'll walk from there." "Roland, whatever this is." "I know. I'll call you tomorrow. Thank you, old friend." He pulled to the curb. I climbed down carefully, my body protesting every movement. Lester watched me, his expression troubled but trusting. "You take care of yourself," he said quietly. "That's the plan." I walked the last 3 blocks slowly, letting the evening shadows hide me. My house came into view, the house I'd built, board by board, the house Brian and Stephanie wanted to steal. Lights were on in the living room. Through the front window, I could see movement inside. They were home, in my house, probably already planning the sale, celebrating their success. They had no idea what was about to walk through that door. The back door key turned silently in the lock, just as it had 10,000 times before. But I'd never entered my own home as a ghost before. I stepped into the kitchen, my kitchen, where I'd installed every cabinet, laid every tile, built the breakfast bar from reclaimed oak. The lights were off, but I could navigate this space blind. I set my empty backpack on the counter, a deliberate gesture, leaving it where they'd see it eventually. Voices drifted from the living room. Stephanie's laugh, high and sharp, Brian's lower rumble in response. They sounded relaxed, happy. I moved to the kitchen doorway and stood in the darkness, listening. "The master bedroom needs updating, but the bones are good." Stephanie's voice carried that real estate agent enthusiasm she'd probably practiced. "We could get 580. Maybe 600,000 in this market. Should we wait a month before listing?" Brian asked. "For appearances?" "Why? Hiking accident. Tragic but clean. No one will question it." Ice flooded my veins. Not the cold of the mountains, but something colder, pure, distilled understanding that they felt no remorse whatsoever. They'd tried to murder me, and now they were discussing paint colors. I leaned against the doorframe, eyes closed, listening to them dissect my life's work like it was a commodity they'd purchased at a discount. Remove wallpaper, replace fixtures, stage for maximum sale price. My own son was drinking wine in my living room, planning how quickly he could erase evidence that I'd ever existed here. Enough. I straightened, moved through the dark hallway to the foyer, and found the light switch. The fluorescent overhead blazed to life, flooding the space with harsh brightness. Then I stepped into the living room doorway. Brian saw me first. He'd been reaching for the wine bottle, my wine, from the rack I'd built in the basement, and his hand froze mid-air. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. His mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Stephanie turned to see what had paralyzed him. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd met her 7 years ago, I saw genuine emotion crack through her careful mask. "Fear." "Dad?" Brian's voice came out as a croak. He lurched to his feet, knocking over his wineglass. Red liquid spread across the coffee table I'd built from maple 20 years ago. What are you?" "I live here, Brian." My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Flat, cold, completely empty of the warmth I'd always tried to maintain with my son. "Or did you forget that when you left me to die?" Stephanie recovered faster than Brian, her expression shifting as she calculated her response. "That's absurd. You wandered off. We searched for hours." I took 3 steps into the room. They both flinched backward. "You searched?" I let the question hang. "Is that what you call taking my backpack? My supplies, my phone, leaving me unconscious on cold rock?" "You were confused," Stephanie tried. "You fell, hit your head." "I heard you, Stephanie." The words came out like ice chips. "I was conscious. I heard every word." "Leave him, Brian. Look around. We're miles from anywhere. An elderly man, difficult terrain." A fall. It's tragic, but these things happen. No one will question it. Those were your exact words. Brian made a sound like he'd been punched. Stephanie's face went still, calculating the damage, searching for an angle. You don't understand the full situation, she started. The doorbell rang. Perfect timing. I'd given them an estimated arrival window, and the authorities had delivered exactly when I'd asked. Excuse me, I said, turning toward the front door. I'm expecting company. Dad, wait! Brian reached out, but I was already moving. I opened the door to reveal two people. Amanda Clark, from Adult Protective Services, carrying a leather folder with Oregon state seal visible, her expression professionally concerned. Beside her stood Detective Morris from Portland Police Bureau, his badge clipped to his belt, his presence radiating quiet authority. Mr. Freeman, Amanda said, thank you for calling us. Are these the family members you mentioned? Yes, I stepped back, holding the door wide so they had a clear view into the living room, where Brian and Stephanie stood frozen. Brian, Stephanie, meet Amanda Clark from Adult Protective Services and Detective Morris. They're very interested in discussing your hiking accident. Detective Morris moved past me into the foyer, his eyes taking in the scene, the spilled wine, the shocked faces, my blood-stained appearance. Mr. Freeman, Ms. Freeman, we need to ask you some questions about the events of August 16th in the Mount Hood area. Brian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is a misunderstanding. Dad got hurt. We tried to help. You took his medication, Amanda said, checking her notes. His phone, his water and supplies, then left him alone, injured, miles from the nearest trail. Mr. Freeman has provided a detailed statement about the events. Stephanie's hand gripped the back of the couch. I could see her mind working, trying to find the play that would save them. But there wasn't one. I'd made sure of that. We panicked, Stephanie said, her voice suddenly softer, more vulnerable, a performance I recognized. It was a terrible mistake. Roland, we're so sorry. Save it, I cut her off. Detective Ms. Clark, they can explain themselves to you. I've already given my statement. Amanda pulled documentation from her folder, her expression hardening. We also have some questions about financial transactions from Mr. Roland Freeman's accounts over the past 18 months. Specifically, $67,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. The room went silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock I'd restored with my own hands 15 years ago. Brian's face went from white to gray. What? During my drive back, I called my bank, I said quietly. Asked them to review all transactions on accounts where other parties had access. Turns out, Brian, you've been helping yourself to my money for quite a while. Small amounts, spread out, thought I wouldn't notice. Stephanie's hand reached for Brian's arm, but he pulled away from her touch, the first crack in their unified front. I was going to pay it back, Brian whispered. The house, the renovation loans, you were stealing from your father while planning to kill him for his property, Detective Morris said flatly. That's premeditation, Mr. Freeman. That changes everything. Amanda opened her documentation folder wider, revealing page after page of bank statements I'd authorized them to pull during my phone call from Lester's truck. Credit card charges, cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts in your name, all without your father's knowledge or permission. Stephanie tried once more, her voice sharp with desperation. He's an elderly man with a head injury. He's confused, making accusations. I have the bank records, I said. I have the mountain rescue coordinates. I have my testimony about what you said while you thought I was unconscious. I paused, letting each point land. And I have something else. I pulled Lester's phone from my pocket, the screen showing the voice memo app, the recording I'd started the moment before I entered the house, capturing their entire conversation about selling my property, their callous discussion of the accident, their complete lack of remorse. Hiking accident, tragic but clean. No one will question it. I repeated Stephanie's words from minutes ago. It's all here. Brian sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Stephanie remained standing, but her posture had changed. Shoulders hunched, defensive, trapped. Detective Morris pulled out his notebook. Amanda opened her documentation folder wider. They settled into chairs, preparing for what would be a long evening of questions and accusations and the slow, methodical building of a case. I stood by the doorway, watching my son and daughter-in-law realize the full scope of the trap I'd laid. They'd thought the mountains would solve their problems. They'd thought an old man was easy to dispose of. They'd forgotten who taught me how to build things that last, how to plan carefully, how to work with precision and patience. Stephanie's eyes met mine across the room, and in them I saw the exact moment she understood. This wasn't just about the abandonment I'd been planning during those hours of survival, during that long drive home. Every piece had been positioned carefully, and I was just getting started. Brian found his voice first, though it came out higher than usual, stretched thin by panic he couldn't quite mask. We stopped for lunch around noon. Dad said he wanted to explore a side trail. You know how he is, stubborn about staying on marked paths. We told him to stay close, but when we finished eating, he was gone. He gestured as he spoke, hands moving in rehearsed arcs. We searched for over 2 hours, called his name until we were hoarse, finally hiked back down to report him missing to the rangers. Stephanie nodded along, her face arranged in an expression meant to convey concern. We were terrified. The terrain up there. Anything could have happened. I watched them perform, these two people I'd welcomed into my family, into my home. The lies flowed smoothly, practiced during the drive down from the mountains while they believed I was dying alone on cold stone. Detective Morris wrote in his notebook, his pen moving steadily. Then he looked up at me. "Mr. Freeman, is that your recollection of events?" "No." I unbuttoned my shirt slowly, my movements deliberate. The fabric pulled away to reveal my chest and ribs, where purple-black bruising had bloomed in the pattern of 2 hands. Brian's hands, captured in discoloration like a photograph of violence. These bruises match my son's handprints. He didn't search for me, he pushed me. Brian's face went white. He fell. I tried to catch him. This phone number," I continued, pulling a folded paper from my pocket, "belongs to a young hiker who found me this morning on the trail. He let me make 1 call. You can verify it with him. His location services were on when he found me." I unfolded the paper, showing the GPS coordinates written in my careful handwriting. 4 miles east of where Brian claims I wandered off, in an area we had no reason to visit unless someone was deliberately taking me somewhere isolated. Detective Morris took the paper, studied it. His expression had shifted from professional skepticism to something harder. "And Lester Ridge, my neighbor," I said quietly, "received my emergency call at 2:15 yesterday afternoon. He drove 6 hours to pick me up. He can verify the time, the location, and my condition when he found me." Amanda Clark leaned forward, her folder open. "Mr. Freeman, Ms. Freeman, the physical evidence and witness testimony contradict your statement. Would you like to revise your account?" Stephanie's jaw tightened. "He's confused. Head injury, trauma." "I heard you." The words cut through her explanation like a blade through soft wood. "I was conscious when you told Brian to leave me there. When you said accidents happen in the mountains. When you discussed how no one would question my death." I paused, let that sink in. I heard every word. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Detective Morris set down his pen, his expression grave. "Mr. Freeman, Ms. Freeman, the evidence contradicts your statement. Abandonment of a person in circumstances likely to cause serious injury or death is a Class C felony in Oregon, carrying up to 5 years imprisonment. Based on what I'm hearing, this appears to have been intentional, not accidental. I need you both to come to the station for formal questioning. You have the right to contact an attorney." Brian sank back onto the couch, all his earlier confidence evaporating. Stephanie remained standing, but her posture had changed, shoulders pulled back, chin lifted in defiance rather than concern. "There's another issue," I said, and 5 pairs of eyes turned to me. "Related, but separate." I stood slowly, my body protesting the movement, and walked to my workshop. The stairs down felt longer than usual, my legs heavy with exhaustion that was finally catching up to adrenaline. But I'd prepared for this moment. 3 months ago, when I'd first noticed the discrepancies in my account balance, I'd started printing statements. Not enough to confront Brian then. I'd wanted to believe there was an explanation. Now those documents would serve a different purpose. I returned with a manila folder, the same kind Brian had used to present those house transfer documents at the camping table. Symmetry felt appropriate. My retirement account had $89,000 in January of last year. I slid the folder across to Amanda. "This month, It has 46,000. Brian has had power of attorney since I closed my workshop 3 years ago. I trusted him to handle the paperwork while I adjusted to retirement. Financial matters, bill payments, that sort of thing. Amanda opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. Her expression shifted. These withdrawals, she said slowly, they're consistent over time. Small amounts initially, growing larger. She looked up at Brian. Did your father authorize these transactions? They were loans, Brian said quickly. Business expenses. I was going to pay him back. I never authorized any loans. My voice stayed level, factual. I didn't know about the withdrawals until I checked my balance 3 months ago. Brian told me it was market fluctuations, investment fees. I didn't know enough to question him. Amanda pulled out more documents from her folder, cross-referencing with my statements. Mr. Freeman, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a Class B felony in Oregon. If these transactions were made without your knowledge or consent, using power of attorney authority for personal benefit rather than your welfare, that constitutes criminal financial abuse. Detective Morris leaned over to look at the statements. His jaw tightened. How much total? I haven't calculated exactly, I said, but approximately $43,000 over 18 months. Possibly more? I only pulled statements going back to January of last year. We'll need complete records, Amanda said, already taking notes. Every account where Brian Freeman held power of attorney, every transaction. This investigation just expanded significantly. Brian's hands were shaking now. Dad, this is a misunderstanding. Those weren't, I can explain. You can explain at the station, Detective Morris said. He stood, his posture authoritative. Mr. Freeman, Ms. Freeman, you're both being asked to come in for formal questioning regarding multiple serious allegations. I strongly suggest you contact legal counsel immediately. We'll be requesting warrants for financial records, phone records, and any other documentation relevant to these claims. Stephanie finally spoke, her voice cold and controlled. We'll have our attorney contact you in the morning. You can call from the station if you prefer, Morris replied. But we need formal statements tonight, both of you. I watched them stand, watched Brian's legs barely support his weight, watched Stephanie's hand reach for his arm in what might have looked like support, but felt more like a handler managing a failing asset. Amanda turned to me as they moved toward the door, Morris flanking them like the law enforcement presence he was. Mr. Freeman, we'll need complete cooperation from you as well. Medical documentation of your injuries, complete financial records, witness contact information for Lester Ridge, and the hiker who helped you. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I'll be there, I said. The door closed behind them, and suddenly the house was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The clock I'd restored with my own hands, keeping time in the house I'd built, paid for with the retirement account my son had been stealing from. I sat down heavily on the couch. My couch, in my house, in the space I'd created through 40 years of labor, and let myself feel the full weight of exhaustion for the first time since the mountains. The investigation had 2 tracks now: criminal abandonment, financial exploitation, multiple felonies, each carrying years of imprisonment. I'd given the authorities the evidence to start their work, but this was just the beginning. Brian and Stephanie had tried to erase me from the world. Instead, they'd given me the ammunition to erase them from my life, legally, systematically, completely. The next phase would require patience, documentation, and the kind of methodical attention to detail that had made me a master craftsman. I'd built houses that lasted generations. Now I would build a case that would stand for just as long. David Porter's office occupied the 7th floor of a downtown building whose lobby granite I'd probably installed decades ago, back when I took whatever commercial work paid well. Now I sat across from Porter himself, my bank statements spread across his mahogany conference table like evidence at a crime scene, which, I supposed, they were. Walk me through when you first suspected financial irregularities, Porter said, his pen poised above a yellow legal pad. 3 months back, I needed cash for materials. Wanted to help my neighbor Lester build a new deck. Contractor quoted him too high. I pulled off my reading glasses, rubbed my eyes, checked my retirement account balance online. It was lower than it should have been. Not catastrophically, but enough to notice. Brian said market fluctuations, investment fees, Standard volatility. I didn't know enough to question him then. Porter's assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, began highlighting transactions on the statements with a yellow marker. Each stroke of color represented another piece of theft, another betrayal I'd been too trusting to catch. Over the next 4 days, I returned to Porter's office each morning, settling into the same conference room chair, reviewing 18 months of financial records with the same careful attention I used to give to blueprint measurements. The pattern emerged slowly, like grain revealing itself under sandpaper. "Look at this." Porter arranged statements chronologically across the table's full length. January through March of last year, withdrawals of 800, 1200, 900, small enough that you might miss them if you weren't watching closely. Then April through June, they grow, 1500, 2000, 3500. By fall, he's taking 5,000 at a time. This March, 8,000 in a single month. He got confident, I said quietly. More than that, look at the amounts. Porter tapped his pen on the paper. Every single withdrawal is under $10,000. That's not accidental, Roland. Your son understood that banks are required to report transactions over 10,000 to federal authorities. He was deliberately structuring the theft to avoid detection. That's sophisticated criminal behavior. Jennifer pulled up credit card statements on her laptop. The joint account he shares with Stephanie, that's where most of the transferred money went. Then it dispersed into cash withdrawals and luxury purchases. Designer clothing charges, high-end restaurants, a leased Mercedes. She scrolled through the list. Vacation packages to Cancun, Napa Valley, Miami. My retirement money, earned through decades of 6-day work weeks and careful saving, had funded their comfortable lifestyle, while they plotted to take even more. "What's the total?" I asked. Porter consulted his notes. $67,480 that we can document. There may be more in cash withdrawals we can't directly trace, but we can prove this amount definitively. The number settled into my chest like a weight, not the amount itself. Money could be recovered, earned back, replaced, but what it represented: systematic theft from someone they claimed to love, escalating over months while they smiled to my face and planned my death. "There's something else," Porter said. He slid a manila folder across the table. "We went to the Multnomah County Recorder's office yesterday. Found this in pending status." I opened the folder. A deed transfer document claiming I'd voluntarily gifted my house to Brian. My signature at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. The loops were wrong, the pressure uneven, a forgery, and not even a skilled one. "This was filed 6 weeks ago," Porter continued, "but a sharp-eyed processor flagged it as questionable. They'd have contacted you eventually for verification, but it's been sitting in bureaucratic limbo. He tried to steal my house," the words felt surreal spoken aloud, "through a forged document. The notarization is fraudulent too. That's a separate crime. And look at the date." Porter pointed to the signature line. "July 8th. You were in Seattle that weekend at a woodworking exhibition. I have your hotel receipts and exhibition registration. You couldn't have signed this document because you weren't even in Oregon." The clerk at the recorder's office had apologized profusely when we'd discovered the document, explaining their backlog, their verification process, how they would have caught it eventually. I'd thanked her for her sharp eyes and filed a formal complaint about the fraudulent filing. "So we have documented theft of $67,000, attempted fraud on a property worth $580,000, an abuse of power of attorney authority," Porter said, ticking items off on his fingers. "Plus the criminal abandonment case the police are building. Your son is facing multiple felonies across 2 separate investigations." "What's my move?" I asked. Porter leaned back in his chair, studying me. "The criminal case proceeds regardless. That's the state's call now. But civilly, you have options. We can file a comprehensive lawsuit seeking full restitution of stolen funds, punitive damages for the fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, legal fees, and injunctive relief preventing them from any contact with you or claims on your property. Make this public. Make this expensive for them. I want every dollar back," I said without hesitation. "I want them to understand they don't get to steal my life's work, and I want everyone to know what they did." "Then that's what we'll do." Porter pulled out a draft complaint, 23 pages his paralegal had prepared overnight. "This documents everything: conversion, fraud, elder financial abuse, breach of fiduciary duty. Oregon law provides enhanced damages for financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. We're seeking actual damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, and permanent injunction. Once this is filed, it becomes public record. The community will know. Your son will be publicly accused of elder abuse and theft. I reached for the pen. Good, let them know. Truth isn't something to hide. That afternoon, while Porter's office finalized the filing, I drove home and changed my locks. Lester sat on my front porch, drinking iced tea and watching me work. "You're doing all right?" he asked after a while. "Getting there." I fitted a new deadbolt into the front door, the brass mechanism sliding into place with satisfying precision. They had keys, been using the house whenever they wanted, apparently. That's how they were inside when I came back. Lester nodded, sipped his tea, asked nothing more. His presence was enough. Quiet support without intrusion, the kind of solidarity that didn't require explanation. I installed new locks on both doors, then reset the garage code. My hands knew the work, moving through the installation with the muscle memory of decades spent with tools. Each turn of the screwdriver felt like reclaiming territory, taking back the space my hands had built 30 years ago. Porter called that evening as I was preparing dinner. "It's filed. The courthouse clerk stamped it at 3:45 this afternoon. They'll be served within 48 hours. Process server has their attorney's address. Once they see what we've documented, they'll understand we have everything." "Thank you, David." "Roland, I've been practicing elder law for 20 years. I've seen a lot of financial exploitation cases, but I've never seen someone respond with your level of strategic clarity. Most victims are paralyzed by betrayal, especially when it's family. You're prosecuting this like a military campaign." "I spent 40 years building things that last," I said. "Structure, planning, attention to detail. This isn't different, just a different kind of construction." "Well, you're building a strong case. The criminal investigators have the abandonment evidence. We have the civil fraud documentation. Your son is about to be hit from multiple directions simultaneously. He won't know where to defend first." After Porter hung up, I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd listened to Brian and Stephanie plan my funeral just days ago, and felt something close to satisfaction, not happiness. The grief was still there, buried under strategy and action, waiting for a quiet moment to surface. But satisfaction that the pieces were moving, the structure was taking shape, the foundation was solid, the locks were changed, the documents were filed, the evidence was compiled in binders in Porter's office, and boxes at the police station, and files at Adult Protective Services. 3 different investigations, 3 different angles of attack, all converging on the same target. Brian had studied me his whole life, learned my patterns, exploited my trust, but he'd forgotten or never truly understood what made me successful at my craft. Not just skill with tools, but patience, planning, the ability to see a project from foundation to completion, to anticipate problems before they arose, to build with precision and care. I'd built my career on those principles. Now I was building their destruction on the same foundation. The next morning, Porter's paralegal would deliver the civil complaint. A process server would find Brian wherever he was staying and hand him 23 pages of documented accusations. He'd read about the withdrawals, the forged deed, the breach of fiduciary duty, the demand for full restitution plus punitive damages plus legal fees. He'd understand then, if he hadn't already, that surviving the mountains was just the beginning. The real revenge was patient, legal, and absolutely devastating. I ate dinner alone in my reclaimed house, surrounded by the woodwork my hands had shaped, protected by locks my hands had just installed. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new evidence, new steps in the systematic dismantling of my son's life. But tonight, for the first time since the camping trip, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. The counterattack arrived faster than I expected. 2 days after the courthouse clerk stamped my filing, I sat in David Porter's office, reading Marcus Webb's motion to dismiss. Each paragraph felt like a punch wrapped in legal language, clinical words weaponized to paint me as the problem rather than the victim. Petitioner suffers from age-related cognitive decline, manifesting in paranoid ideation and inability to accurately assess financial transactions, the motion read. All transfers from Roland Freeman's accounts were legitimate gifts to support family obligations, authorized by Mr. Freeman himself through properly executed power of attorney. Current accusations represent confusion and memory impairment common in elderly individuals experiencing dementia. I looked up at Porter. They're calling me incompetent. They're arguing you lacked capacity to understand the transactions, Porter said carefully. Webb claims the power of attorney itself proves you needed help managing affairs, and that Brian was acting in your best interest. My best interest was leaving me to die in the mountains? That's criminal court. This is civil. They're separating the issues, making you the unreliable narrator of your own life. Porter tapped the motion with his pen. The problem is timing. You don't have recent medical records showing competency. Your last full physical was 18 months ago. Webb will argue a lot can change in that time, especially at your age. The implications settled over me like a weight. Without current medical documentation, I was vulnerable to their narrative, the confused old man who couldn't remember authorizing transactions, who imagined conspiracies where there was only family concern. Set up whatever appointments necessary, I said. They want to call me incompetent? I'll prove otherwise. That afternoon, Lester appeared at my door, holding his phone like it contained something toxic. You need to see this, he said. Stephanie's post filled the screen. A photo from a family dinner 2 years ago, her arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. The caption read, heartbroken that my beloved father-in-law's illness has progressed to paranoid accusations. For 3 years, I've helped Roland manage his household after retirement. He's struggled with the transition, become increasingly hostile. Now he's making terrible accusations against Brian, who only tried to protect his father's assets. We're devastated, but committed to getting him the help he needs. Elder care, enough family first. 47 sympathetic comments already. People I'd never met offering prayers and support for Stephanie's burden. Neighbors asking if there was anything they could do to help the poor woman. She's making it sound like I'm the danger, I said quietly. There's more. Lester scrolled to show posts on neighborhood groups, community pages, all variations on the same theme. Stephanie as devoted caregiver, me as declining elder, too proud to accept help. The next morning, a process server handed me Brian's counterclaim at my front door. 20 pages accusing me of defamation, malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brian claimed my false accusations had destroyed his reputation and employment prospects. He was seeking $50,000 in damages. My son, who'd stolen my money and tried to kill me, was now positioning himself as the victim. I read Webb's public statement in the newspaper that afternoon. My clients are heartbroken. Mr. Roland Freeman is a man who built a wonderful life, but is now struggling with age-related decline. Rather than accepting help, he's lashing out at those who care most about him. We'll prove these accusations are products of confusion, not facts. The words were calculated, sympathetic, designed to reframe the entire situation, and they were working. I walked to the corner store that evening for milk. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived 3 houses down for 15 years, stopped me on the sidewalk. "Roland," she said, her voice gentle in a way that made my teeth clench. "I saw Stephanie's post. I didn't know you were having difficulties. Is there someone we should call? Family services, maybe? Someone to help you?" I looked at Margaret Patterson's concerned face and understood what was happening. Stephanie's campaign had transformed me from wronged father to confused burden in the span of 48 hours. "Margaret, I appreciate your concern," I said, maintaining the dignity that was becoming harder to hold with each interaction. "But everything you're reading online is a lie. Brian and Stephanie are facing criminal charges for abandonment and theft. The truth will come out." Her expression shifted, not quite doubt, but not quite belief either. That middle ground where people decided someone might be unreliable, where whispers began. I continued to the store, bought my milk, and walked home aware of glances following me. The neighborhood I'd lived in for 30 years suddenly felt different, charged with speculation and gossip. Back at Porter's office the next day, he spread Webb's filings across his desk with visible frustration. "They're good," he admitted. "Webb's been doing elder law for 20 years. He knows how to construct this defense, and he's executing it well. The social media campaign creates public sympathy. The counterclaim puts you on defense. The medical competency argument attacks the foundation of your entire case. So what do? We need current medical evidence, strong evidence, comprehensive cognitive evaluation by a respected neuropsychologist. We need witnesses who can testify to your recent mental acuity and independence. We need to document your capabilities in ways that can't be disputed. Porter pulled out a notepad and began writing. Full medical evaluation, cognitive assessment, psychiatric review if needed, character witnesses who've interacted with you recently and can speak to your competence, documentation of any complex activities you've completed, financial planning, home maintenance, anything requiring judgment and reasoning. The entertainment center? I said suddenly. What? 3 months ago, Marcus Thompson commissioned a custom entertainment center. Mahogany, complex joinery, precise measurements. I completed it in May. He has photos, paid me $3,800. That's not work a confused man could do. Porter's pen stopped moving. That's exactly what we need. Physical proof of recent complex cognitive function. What else? I volunteer at the community center. Teach woodworking to kids every Thursday. Have for 2 years. You think Pastor Franklin would testify? If he will, that's powerful. Ongoing responsibility, teaching complex skills, working with youth. That requires mental sharpness. Porter was writing quickly now. Anyone else? Neighbors who can counter Stephanie's narrative? Lester, obviously. Jerome Williams. He owns the restaurant on Division. I built him custom tables last year. Others in the woodworking community who know my work. Good. We compile all of it. Medical proof, witness testimony, physical evidence of capability. We show Webb's incompetence argument is fiction. Porter looked up, his expression serious. But Roland, this will take time. Meanwhile, Stephanie's campaign continues. The pressure will get worse before it gets better. He was right. Over the next few days, I felt the weight of public doubt settling on my shoulders like snow, cold, accumulating, threatening to bury me. Neighbors' glances, overheard fragments of conversation, the way people suddenly had somewhere else to be when I approached. Stephanie's narrative was working because it fit comfortable assumptions. Elderly people decline, families struggle, accusations of abuse are sometimes confused misunderstandings. My truth was harder, uglier, requiring people to believe that a son would try to murder his father for money. But I'd survived in the mountains with nothing but determination and skills I'd learned decades ago. I'd built houses that stood for generations. I could survive this too. That evening, Porter handed me a list of doctors and evaluation centers. Start tomorrow. We document everything. They want to call you incompetent. We'll show them competence so clear it can't be questioned. I took the list, feeling the paper's weight like a promise. My son was calling me a confused old man, a burden, a liar. The community was beginning to believe him. Time to prove them all wrong. The medical evaluation began with memory tests. Dr. Helena Morrison showed me a list of 15 words, let me study them for 60 seconds, then asked me to recall them 5 minutes later, after we'd discussed other topics. I remembered all 15. Excellent, she said, making a note. Now we'll move to pattern recognition. 3 hours later, I'd completed the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, executive function batteries, spatial reasoning tests, and detailed memory evaluations. Dr. Morrison reviewed my scores with an expression that might have been approval. Mr. Freeman, I've administered comprehensive cognitive testing across multiple domains. Your scores place you in the superior range for your age group. Actually, superior range for any age group. There is zero evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or any mental decline. Frankly, you're sharper than most 50-year-olds I evaluate. Can you document that? I asked. I'll have a detailed written report to your attorney within 48 hours. It will be very clear. I left her office feeling something close to vindication. They'd tried to paint me as incompetent. Science said otherwise. Porter's conference room filled with faces over the next 2 days. Marcus Thompson arrived first, carrying a folder of photographs. Roland built me that entertainment center last May, he told Porter, sliding photos across the table. Complex design. I showed him a magazine picture. He drafted plans from memory, calculated materials without a calculator. Look at these dovetailed joints, hand-carved details. Took him 6 weeks, working alone, every joint perfect. Porter studied the photographs, and I watched him recognize what I'd known he would. This wasn't simple carpentry. This was mathematics and engineering translated into wood, requiring spatial reasoning, problem-solving, sustained attention to detail. That's not a man with mental problems, Marcus continued. That's a master craftsman at peak ability. I paid him $3,800, and it was worth every cent. Jerome Williams came next, describing custom tables I'd built for his restaurant the previous winter. Then Pastor Franklin from the community center, his testimony, perhaps most powerful of all. Roland's been teaching woodworking at our youth center every Thursday for 2 years, Franklin said. The kids respect him because he's patient, clear, and demanding. Last month, he taught a class on geometric principles in furniture design, used algebra and trigonometry, to explain compound angles. You think a confused man could do that? He's one of our most reliable volunteers. Porter took detailed notes, his assistant recording everything, preparing formal affidavits for court filing. Each witness built the same picture: recent, complex, demanding work that required full cognitive function. "We need to document the entertainment center itself," Porter said after the interviews. "Do you still have it?" "It's in my old workshop. I still rent the space for storage. Marcus hasn't picked it up yet. It's large. He's waiting until after his kitchen renovation." We drove there that afternoon, my old workshop feeling both familiar and distant. The entertainment center stood against the far wall, 6 feet of mahogany testimony to recent competence. Porter photographed everything: the dovetail joints, the hand-carved crown molding, the interior drawers with their precisely fitted slides. While he worked, I explained the calculations required, how I'd adjusted the design when the mahogany grain pattern revealed a weakness in the original plan, how I'd solved the problem of the center's weight distribution, how each measurement had to account for wood movement across seasons. "This is your defense," Porter said, still photographing. "Physical, undeniable proof of complex cognitive function 3 months ago. Webb can't argue you were incompetent in May, and then suddenly lucid enough to make accusations in August." The evidence was building, systematic and overwhelming: medical documentation, witness testimony, physical proof of capability. But the most damaging discoveries were still coming. Detective Morris called 2 days later. "Mr. Freeman, can you come to the station? We've obtained some additional evidence you need to see." In his office, Morris pulled up security footage on his computer. "This is from Nordstrom at Pioneer Place Mall, July 22nd of this year." The video showed Stephanie walking through the store with the ease of someone who belonged there. She selected items methodically: designer dresses, an expensive handbag, a leather jacket. At the register, she handed over a credit card without hesitation, signed the receipt, collected her purchases. "That card is linked to your account," Morris said. The purchase total was $3,800. Same day, different store, another $1,200 at a jewelry boutique. We have footage from both locations. I watched Stephanie on screen, her body language showing entitled familiarity, not someone making emergency purchases for an incapacitated family member. This was comfortable, routine theft, so casual it was almost insulting. "We also obtained phone records through court order," Morris continued. He handed me printed text messages, 3 pages of exchanges between Brian and Stephanie. I read my son's words in black and white. July 18th. "Dad's being impossible about the house. Something needs to change." Stephanie's response: "Make it change. Accidents happen." July 22nd. "Talk to him again. He won't budge. Getting worse." Stephanie: "Then we move to Plan B. The camping trip. Remote location. July 29th. Confirmed reservation. 3 days, Mount Hood. Plenty of isolated trail sections." Stephanie: "Perfect. Nature takes care of our problem." The dates told the story. July 18th, 28 days before they left me in the mountains. They'd been planning my death for nearly a month, discussing it in text messages they somehow thought were private, immune to discovery. "This is premeditation," Morris said quietly, "combined with the abandonment evidence and the financial theft. We're looking at conspiracy charges, attempted murder. This isn't reckless endangerment anymore. This is calculated, planned, documented intent to kill you for financial gain." I stared at the words. "Make it change. Accidents happen." My son had written that. My son had planned to kill me, put it in writing, and proceeded to execute the plan. "We're presenting this to the district attorney next week," Morris continued. "With the text messages, the security footage, the financial evidence, and the witness testimony from the mountains, we have a strong case for serious felonies, both of them." I left the police station with copies of everything, the evidence heavy in my briefcase, but my step somehow lighter. The truth was documented now, undeniable, preserved in medical reports and witness statements and security footage and their own foolish words. That evening, Porter spread the compiled evidence across his conference table: medical reports showing superior cognitive function, witness affidavits attesting attesting to my competence. Photographs of the entertainment center, security footage of Stephanie's shopping spree, and the text messages planning my death. This isn't just a defense anymore, Roland, Porter said, looking at the array of documentation. This is a prosecution. Webb's incompetence argument collapses completely against Dr. Morrison's evaluation. The witness testimony provides recent specific examples of complex cognitive function. The entertainment center is physical proof impossible to dispute. And these text messages, he tapped the printouts, these show premeditation in addition to everything else. What happens now? I asked. We file our response to Webb's motion, attaching all this evidence. We file supplemental documentation in the civil case. We let the criminal prosecutors build their case with the text messages. And we watch Brian and Stephanie's world crumble under the weight of their own documented guilt. Porter began organizing the evidence into exhibits, his movements methodical, professional. They tried to paint you as incompetent. Instead, we've documented superior mental function. They tried to gain public sympathy. We're about to show everyone what they really are, thieves and attempted murderers who documented their own crimes. I picked up the text messages again, reading Brian's words one more time. Make it change. Accidents happen. Written weeks before he pushed me onto stone and walked away. The pressure from the previous week felt distant now, replaced by something colder and more focused. They'd fought back with lies and social media manipulation. I'd responded with truth and documentation, medical proof, community witnesses, physical evidence, security footage. Their own words turned against them. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was documented. Now came the part where everyone else would see it. The court, the public, the neighbors who doubted me, the community that had begun to believe Stephanie's lies. They'd tried to erase me from the world. Instead, they'd created an evidence trail so clear, so damning, that their guilt was now impossible to deny. I left Porter's office as the sun set over Portland. The evidence copies secured in my briefcase. The weight of proof somehow lighter than the weight of doubt had been. The counterattack was over. Now came justice. The Portland Tribune landed on my porch Thursday morning, with my face on the front page. I stood in my doorway, coffee cup in hand, staring at the headline. Elder abuse case exposes financial exploitation scheme. Below it, a photograph taken 3 years ago in my workshop. Me holding a hand plane, mid-stroke on a piece of cherry wood, looking focused and capable. The image the editors chose deliberately countered any narrative about confusion or decline. The article spanned 3 pages. I carried it inside and read every word. The reporter had done thorough work. She'd interviewed Marcus Thompson, Jerome Williams, Pastor Franklin from the community center. She'd obtained copies of the text messages, names redacted but content devastating. Make it change. Accidents happen. The timeline graphic showed $67,000 disappearing from my accounts in small, structured amounts over 18 months. Another sidebar featured a photograph of my injuries, the bruises still visible when they were documented days after the mountain. By mid-morning, Porter called. It's everywhere. Community social media groups, neighborhood forums. Your story's spreading fast. That what we wanted? It is. Public awareness protects you, makes it harder for Webb to spin any narrative about your competency. The text messages especially, people are outraged. That afternoon, Marcus Thompson organized a community meeting at the Northeast Community Center. I almost didn't go. The thought of being the center of attention, of people's sympathy or anger on my behalf, felt uncomfortable. But Lester insisted, drove me there himself. The room was packed, 60, maybe 70 people. Former clients holding photographs of furniture I'd built, dining tables, bookshelves, bed frames, each piece triggering memories of measurements and grain patterns and customer conversations. Young men I'd trained at the community center, some now running their own small carpentry businesses. Neighbors I'd known for decades. Marcus stood at the front, organizing the chaos with practiced efficiency. We're here to support Roland Freeman. Many of you know him, know his work, know his character. What his son and daughter-in-law did, that's not just crime. It's betrayal of the worst kind. We're establishing a legal defense fund. Whatever you can contribute. The donation jar filled quickly. Cash, checks, even a few people using their phones to transfer money electronically. I sat in the back row, overwhelmed by the validation, by the tangible proof that 40 years of honest work had earned something more valuable than money, genuine respect. A young man named Terence, maybe 25, stood up. Mr. Freeman taught me how to cut dovetail joints when I was 17, spent hours with me, patient, never charged $1. He said craftsmanship was about passing knowledge forward. Now it's our turn to stand with him. The applause that followed felt warm, human. I nodded, my eyes wet but controlled. These people understood what Brian and Stephanie never had. That legacy wasn't about accumulating assets, but about building something that outlasted you. By week's end, the legal defense fund held over $12,000. The formal charges came down on Monday. Detective Morris called early, asked me to come to the district attorney's office. Porter met me there, and together we sat with Deputy DA Christine Walsh, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Freeman," she said, sliding documents across her desk, "based on the investigation conducted by Detective Morris, my office is filing formal charges against Brian Freeman and Stephanie Freeman." She read each count with crisp precision. Reckless endangerment, a Class C felony carrying up to 5 years. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a Class B felony carrying up to 10 years. Attempted real estate fraud for Stephanie, an additional count of conspiracy to commit harm. "The evidence is overwhelming and disturbing," Walsh continued. "Your son and daughter-in-law systematically exploited you, stole your life savings, attempted to fraudulently obtain your property, and then abandoned you in life-threatening conditions to cover their crimes. My office will prosecute this case to the fullest extent of the law." I signed witness statements while a photographer documented everything for the prosecution. The weight of official action, the state itself declaring Brian and Stephanie criminals, provided satisfaction that personal revenge never could have. The consequences cascaded rapidly after that. Brian's employer terminated him immediately. The IT firm where he'd worked for 6 years issued a brief statement about maintaining integrity standards. His LinkedIn profile disappeared within hours. Stephanie's real estate firm placed her on unpaid leave pending outcome. Within days, colleagues were distancing themselves publicly on social media, removing tagged photos, deleting endorsements. Their luxury vehicle, the Mercedes sedan they'd leased with my stolen money, was repossessed Tuesday afternoon. I didn't plan to drive past their apartment complex that day, but I'd taken a route that happened to pass by, and there was the tow truck loading their car while they stood on the sidewalk arguing. I slowed, watching through my windshield. Brian gesturing frantically, his movements desperate. Stephanie's face cold and closed, already calculating her next move. I didn't stop, just drove past slowly, observing gravity pull them down the way they'd tried to pull me. Their apartment management filed eviction proceedings Wednesday for unpaid rent. The legal notice appeared in public records. Porter sent me a copy, his email subject line simply, "Another one." Friday brought the most telling development. Porter called late afternoon, his voice carrying an edge that might have been amusement. "Stephanie filed for divorce this morning. Her attorney issued a public statement claiming Brian manipulated her, coerced her, that she was under his controlling influence, and deeply regrets not protecting you from his schemes." I listened in silence. "She's trying to minimize her sentence by claiming victim status," Porter continued. "But Walsh isn't buying it. The text messages prove she was the architect. She's being charged independently as a co-conspirator." "They're turning on each other," I said. "Greed unified them. Consequences are dividing them." Porter paused. "Walsh wants you to know the prosecution isn't offering any deals based on cooperation. The evidence is too strong. They're both going down." That evening I read Stephanie's attorney's statement on my laptop. Carefully constructed lies about Brian's manipulation and control, about her supposed concern for my welfare, about being trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. The text messages told a different story. "Make it change. Accidents happen." Those were her words. The camping trip plan, the luxury purchases, the calculated strategy, all her fingerprints. But watching them destroy each other somehow made their moral bankruptcy even clearer. They'd unified to steal from me, to kill me. But the moment consequences arrived, they abandoned each other with the same callous selfishness they'd shown me. I closed my laptop and looked around my living room, the furniture I'd built, the house I'd constructed with my own hands, the community that had rallied behind me, the legal system that was holding them them accountable. Somewhere in Portland, my son and his wife were losing everything they'd stolen from me. Their jobs, their car, their home, their freedom, their alliance, and I felt no joy in their destruction, but deep, cold satisfaction in the restoration of balance. They tried to erase me from the world. Instead, they'd erase themselves. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and fluorescent lit, with none of the dramatic grandeur television suggests. I sat in the gallery's second row while David Porter sat beside me, his briefcase on the floor between us. August 29th arrived exactly 2 weeks after Brian left me in the mountains to die. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. 14 days from attempted murder to formal accounting. They brought Brian and Stephanie through a side door, both wearing orange Multnomah County jail uniforms. The designer clothes were gone, the expensive accessories, the carefully constructed image of success. Brian looked diminished, shoulders hunched forward. Stephanie maintained better composure, her spine straight, but her face was pale without makeup. Judge Richard Anderson entered, and we all stood. He was in his early 60s, gray-haired, with the weathered expression of someone who'd seen too many families destroy themselves in his courtroom. "Be seated," he said. "We're here for plea agreement hearings in the cases of State of Oregon versus Brian Freeman and State of Oregon versus Stephanie Freeman." Their attorneys had negotiated plea deals. Porter had explained it to me earlier. Faced with overwhelming evidence, they'd accepted reduced certainty of prison time rather than risk maximum sentences at trial. Smart from their perspective, cowardly from mine. But the result was the same. Judge Anderson addressed Brian first. "Mr. Freeman, you've entered a guilty plea to reckless endangerment and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Do you understand the charges?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brian's voice cracked. "Before I accept your plea and impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement?" Brian turned slightly toward me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I kept my face impassive, giving him nothing. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. The pressure, the debt. I'm sorry, Dad." Tears streamed down his face. Whether genuine remorse or performance, I couldn't tell and didn't care. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some betrayals couldn't be repaired. Judge Anderson let the silence hang a moment, then continued. "Mr. Brian Freeman, you exploited your father's trust, stole his life savings, and attempted to take his home. Then you attempted to murder him to conceal your crimes. Your actions represent profound moral failure." He read the sentence with measured precision. 2 years in Oregon State Correctional Institution, 5 years post-release supervision, mandatory restitution of all stolen funds plus damages, permanent record of elder abuse conviction. Stephanie received 18 months with 3 years supervision, plus a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with me. Her face remained stony throughout, betraying nothing. After sentencing, Porter and I moved to the adjacent courtroom for the restitution hearing. A different judge, different energy, but same outcome. $67,000 in stolen funds, $31,000 in punitive damages, interest, and legal costs. Total judgment, $98,000. Their joint bank account, containing $18,000 from the sale of possessions, was frozen and seized immediately. Court orders went out for inventory and liquidation of remaining assets. The state would pursue the full amount until every dollar was recovered. "They'll be paying you back for years," Porter said as we walked to his car. "Wage garnishment after release, if they ever find decent employment with felony records. Asset seizure if they inherit anything or acquire property. The judgment follows them." I nodded, knowing money couldn't repair trust, but accountability mattered. 2 days later, I sat in my estate attorney's office revising my will. Margaret Chen had handled my paperwork for 15 years. She understood my situation without needing excessive explanation. "Mr. Freeman, this is a substantial estate. Are you certain about this designation? Your biological son will receive nothing." "I'm certain. My son is in prison for trying to kill me. The young people at the Northeast Portland Youth Woodworking Initiative are my real legacy. They'll use what I built to build their own futures. That's what matters." I signed the updated documents with steady hands. The house worth $580,000, the workshop equipment, the retirement accounts, now replenished with restitution payments. Every asset designated for youth education, for teaching underprivileged teenagers skilled trades, for passing knowledge forward the way it was meant to be passed. Creating legacy from betrayal felt right, like finding the correct grain in difficult wood. That weekend, I visited my old workshop one final time. The space would soon transfer to the non-profit, converted into proper teaching facility. I walked through the quiet building, running my hands over workbenches my hands had built, tools my labor had purchased, sawdust still coating surfaces from my last project. The entertainment center for Marcus still stood against the far wall, waiting pickup. I touched the dovetail joints, the hand-carved details, the precise measurements that had proved my competence to skeptics and investigators alike. 40 years of work lived in this space. Now it would serve new generations, teach new hands, build new futures. The continuity satisfied something deep within me. I locked the door and didn't look back. The following week, on a quiet morning when September was just beginning to hint at autumn, Lester and I sat on my front porch drinking coffee. The porch I'd built myself 28 years ago, when Brian was 11 and still believed his father could fix anything. We watched Mrs. Patterson walk her dog past, heard children's voices from the school playground several blocks away, ordinary neighborhood sounds that felt extraordinary after weeks of legal battles and betrayals. "How do you feel, Roland?" Lester asked after long silence. I considered the question carefully, watching the street. The morning sun warmed the porch boards beneath us. A breeze moved through the maple trees I'd planted when I first bought this property. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, maybe the first time since Marie passed, I feel free. Not happy, not sad, just free. I know who I am again." Lester sipped his coffee, nodded slowly. "That's worth more than any house. That's worth everything." We sat in comfortable silence, two old men watching the world continue its ordinary rhythms. My son was in prison. My money was being restored. My home was secure. My legacy was assured. But more than any of that, I was free. Free from betrayal's weight. Free from trust misplaced. Free from the burden of pretending family obligation mattered more than self-preservation. I'd survived the mountains. I'd survived the legal battles. I'd survived the attempt to erase me from my own life. And sitting here in morning sunlight, coffee warm in my hands, my friend beside me, my home solid beneath me, I understood that survival wasn't the same as victory, but it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.